I'm 16 years old and make around $50,000 a month with my company, and today's video I'm going to show you the complete sales process that myself and my business partner use to sign on absolutely every client that we've managed to bring on. We don't use the typical strategy of using case studies or trying to logically close clients. Instead, we rely on authenticity and telling stories in order to build emotional rapport that allows people to buy into you and therefore want to do business for you based on the value that you provide to them. So I hope you enjoy this video. It's a leaked masterclass from one of the Inner Circle communities, and I hope you enjoy. This is going to be how to close 64.8% of your sales calls. Just break down the psychology that once understood will give you the ability to close 3K plus paid full offers like clockwork, right? So the end goal behind this is to be able to really close on those end destination offers, right? So like, hey, 6-month X result, and it will be 5K up front or 3K, and they do payment plan installments, just high ticket offers, right? And I'm going to dive into a little bit of the psychology behind it, but essentially the big switch that I see a lot of people mess up on, let me move this here, is like they have no issue getting the free trial client, right? So free trial client is just a big green check, just like this. But then when it comes to paid offers, like high ticket paid offers, it's just a no, right? And that's because there's a big shift between the emotional and the logic slider when you switch up the price like that, right? Going from $500 that they're investing in their business anyways into a lot of money is a big jump. So because of that, we need to change our sales process, which a lot of people don't do. And because of that, they just get beat up on sales calls, right? And just to, before I dive into it fully, updated definition of learning. This is 100% scripted from Hormozy, but the consumption of information that leads to a change in your behavior, right? Learning is not watching this video then doing nothing, or like watching and like listening to this and then not taking any action off of it. I want you to go to a start point of like, hey, being nervous during sales calls, being kind of scared to bring up the price, feeling like you hit a wall because you're just jumping on calls with people and nothing's going on, and then feeling like everything 10x in difficulty, going into the end point, which will be your change behavior, which is being able to close on these 3K deals, learning how many appointments are like need to actually be booked, stop you spending 100K a month, and then an indirect benefit, you're gonna be much better talking to women, friends, and overall communication, right? Because this doesn't just apply to sales and prospects, it applies to completely everybody whenever you want something. So to start, before I dive into everything, like what makes somebody pay for something? And the quick equation here is that the perceived value is greater than the price associated, right? So they have to see that what you are going to give them, and they have to perceive it as worth more than they're paying, right? There's only 3 types of products you never sell, right? There's health, wealth, relationships, right? As agency owners, we're always going to be selling wealth, right? I hope none of you guys are trying to help somebody with their relationships or get into shape or anything like that. So therefore, right, the ads we run provide leads, which leads provide appointments, appointments provide sales, and sales provide money, right? And I've spoken about what's called a quick concept called association loops. Essentially, is they see, leads, and then at the very bottom here, we've got like daughter to college, right? And these loops are simply how they associate things. And what makes somebody buy is the fact that they associate leads here with daughter to college down here, right? So essentially it's hacking that so we can emotionally move somebody while also giving them a logically good reason to actually move forward. Because of this, the prospect must believe that the value of us running ads for them is going to be worth more than they actually pay. So an example, right? If the offer that we're going to sell is a 3K 3-month end destination for ads on like offering the gyms, right? If somebody were to actually go ahead and buy this, the only reason why is because they believe it will make them more than the ad spend, right? And now it's possible, right? Let's say each client we get the person, their LTV is $1,000 for the gym. All we need to do is close roughly 5 to 6 clients to cover the entire whole thing, right? That's including ad spend, everything like that. So therefore, delivering to make their purchase worthwhile. So that's a really big point here. When you are selling, right, and I'm sure everybody has good services, more for the accelerator guys, but the perceived value has to actually be worth more than the price associated. So if you're going to be running ads, send an destination offer for $5,000, you have to make them more than $5,000 on a consistent basis, right? And that's not the main stipulation. As right in here, like the business does not go to who actually is the best; it goes to the person who's perceived to be the best, right? So your job is to convince the prospect that you can make them more than they can pay, right? And that's all. That's all sales is. You just have to convince the person that what you can provide to them is worth more than they're going to pay. And it's not who's the best, the nerd in his basement that runs the best ads in the world. He doesn't get business, right? It's the person that can make the other guy believe. And the way that I want to, I guess, break this down is these little music sliders. You ever seen like a DJ or a producer? They've got like these sliders that turn up the volume, turn down the gain, and all this stuff. I like to look at sales the same way, right? So my drawing isn't as good, but you get the point of this is a slider and this is a slider, right? And then there's the money pool over here. And I'll actually redraw this right now for you guys so you can actually see. But essentially, this is all that sales really is. And I'll increase the thickness here. So we got slide number 1, slide number 2, and then we've got outside of this very big, what I like to call money pool, right? And then it's within this, and I'll show you how it all works together. We have the two sliders and we move them up and it creates a chute that leads green to the money pool, right? And the way the money pool works is we've got higher up here, right? So this is a lot of money or one money, and then this is a lot of money up here. Does this make sense? Because I know this is kind of like a shitty drawing and shitty analogy. Let me know if this kind of makes sense. Anybody got a voice?
Yeah,
makes
Okay.
sense. Yeah,
Okay, cool. I can't see you guys on Zoom. So essentially, what we see here is like these pegs on the sliders, and this is what makes a sale, right? So if we have, a line like this, you're going to land high from the money pool. And right, and this becomes a lot more believable when we realize that this slider is emotion and this slider is logic, right? So in this example, if we're going to shoot high up in the money pool, it means that there's a lot of logic and then there's a very little emotion, right? And that's what shoots it up, right? You just draw a straight line through both of these and you get to where you want to go. And that is the baseline equation drawing you can use to determine like, hey, what is the buying process for somebody that wants my product, right? You can see here, I draw this example. Motion, logic, the only two factors in sale. They always will be, and that's just it, right? And the higher the price, something more logical, the cheaper the price, the more emotional, right? So example, my first business was a car washing service. A little bit older, but you get the point when I first started this thing. And outside of very few kind strangers, only a few people bought from me, right? My mom, my dad, their friends, my friends' parents. I was only charging $250 a wash, which is pretty cheap considering there's like 15, 30 minutes of my time. But that means the motion and the purchase was actually heavily emotional, right? So the slider ended up looking something like this, right? Emotion was all the way up and the price was close to nothing. So where I land in the price section is barely even in the money pool, right? Hence the price of $250. Just to show you that this actually does make sense. It does work in theory. So here is like a live example of an agency service. Anybody got like who wants me to do this for their offer, like their price? Somebody just say out their offer and I'll create this thing.
Sure. $1,000 a month for 3 months.
$1,000 a month for 3 months. Okay, so
Yeah.
$3K 3 months.
Yeah.
Right. So what I'm going to ask you is we've got these two sliders here. Where do you think that this lands in the money pool?
Oh, fuck.
Right.
Logic.
So how much? Well, I wouldn't say it's that much logic, right? It's only $1,000 a month. Right.
I don't know. You be the one.
Well, I would say, right, it's got a fair bit of logic because it isn't cheap, but it's not very expensive either. Right. I would say this top end here is anywhere between like 10K plus, right, for this example. Right. So I would say we fall on this lower end here. And because of that, we can just level out the emotion as equal. Right. So it's 50-50. Right. It's 50% emotion, 50% logic, and then it shoots us straight across into the mid size of the money pool. Right. This part, therefore, being 10K, and this being like, right. So we're around here. That being said, on your sales calls, do you think that you show as much emotion as you do logic when you're trying to sell somebody?
I try to.
But do you?
I don't. I mean, dude, I guess I do because I close deals, but yeah.
Okay, well, I'm going to show you how to do it way more of the time. Right, and these are the core reasons, these are the first principles behind like why sales are even made in the first place. Right, so we start.
Do this for like, I want to see you do this for like 5K plus $100 a show.
5K plus $100 a show. Okay.
Yeah.
So we've got our two sliders. 5K, if we said 3K was here, it's probably going to be up here-ish. And because
5K one time. 5K one time.
Yeah, right. And like because of that, the only thing that I do is like you just, I guess, reverse it, right? So if it's this high up, then we know the emotion is going to be this high, like this low down, and then just go a line through, and that will land us like again pretty high up on the money pool. If this is 10K, right? Because $100 per show does compound, and that's what I'd say, right? So now this becomes a more logical sale, right? Like there's still emotion involved, but it's heavily logical in the sense of like it has to be a good decision for their business before they decide to pay you, right? And if they don't believe that, whether directly or indirectly, it will not help. And I'm going to go on a side tangent here, but that is another thing, right? It's going to be direct versus indirect. So a lot of people, and what I actually like accidentally did for like, I don't even know, it's longer. Screw it. For a long time in sales, what I did is I indirectly solved people's problems, right? So instead of trying to consciously solve objections, just through the presence that I had in the case studies that I had, I indirectly gave the prospect and I fulfilled this equation up here that the perceived value is worth more than the price, right? And this can happen a lot of the time, right? I give the example of if Grant Cardone were to message a realtor saying, hey, let me run your ads, just like that, one text on Instagram, he closes that person 110% of the time, right? And it's not because he provided up value up front or anything like that. It's because the perceived value indirectly correlates and gives, or yeah, like his profile indirectly gives the perceived value that it's going to be more than the price associated with whatever he charges, right? That's because he's Grant Cardone, he's a billionaire, or I don't even know how much money he's worth, but he's got a private jet. right? So you can indirectly solve these things. And that is what I'm going to go down to a little bit here of like, okay, now that we see this, your sales calls are a game. So as soon as you've identified where your sliders are, you're going to start each sales call at the very bottom, right? So you start right down here. And when you understand, hey, I need, let's say this is a level 7 emotion and a level 3 or level 3 emotion, level 7 logic in order to close this person, all I have to do now is satiate this requirement. It becomes a lot easier, right? Because now I can direct the call knowing that, hey, this person has to have a logical basis in order to buy, plus a little bit of emotion to push them over the edge, right? And sales just becomes a game of getting to this threshold, fulfilling it, right? And it's pretty simple when you look at it this way, but here are all the tactics involved with making that happen consistently, time and time again. Creating an emotional connection with yourself or to yourself with a prospect is the part that majority of people struggle with, right? If you, have your ads dialed, you got clients going, you got go eye level. I don't think a lot of people in here struggle with making their purchase and making their offer logically good, right? You have to be pretty oblivious to go around offering something that doesn't logically make sense to a lot of people. So we're going to say that the logic is mostly covered. Where a lot of people struggle is with emotion, right? So they look at prospects as if they're not human and kind of like we're trying to hack safe to steal their money, right? We ask leading questions, we interrogate them. And what that does is it makes people close up because they feel as though everything that they tell us is going to be used as ammunition in order to sell them later on in the call, right? That's where a lot of people mess up. And I hate to generalize here. That's where I messed up also, right? So this is wrong, right? With this mental frame, you'll not be able to create any emotion at all. And in order to change this, you need to throw out the sales call like completely out of the window, right? Like the frame I use is I wasn't on a sales call. I was just speaking with the person. And instead of the format of most sales calls follow like the fake report about the weather location, hey man, how's it going? Where are you calling from? Da da da. And then, okay, well, usually these calls go into this. Let's dive into this. Da da da. Fuck that. And then the Suedo FBI interrogation, the weak pitch, hard no, and then tears. Right? Like that's what most sales calls went through. That's what I did. Right? Where you go like, hey, you pretend you know and you actually care where they're from. You might add a little relation to it. Okay, cool, that's not terrible. But then the let's dive into this, justifying that you want to talk about their business, kills your frame, right? The interrogation where you just ask question after question, you don't tell them anything about yourself, what you do, kills your frame. And then because of that, these two will never lead to actually satiating this slider right here and then landing anywhere in the money pool. You don't even make it across. So that is what you don't want to do, right? The call should not necessarily follow a script or a format. It should be flowing like water, right? That's how the conversation should go. And you got this image of Bruce Lee. I thought it was like super cool. So I'm just going to keep this up for a second. But there are build-up steps right before doing this. So the first thing you want to look at your sales call is your environment. Right? I like to optimize your environment for conversation. Right? So I don't mean making your Zoom background look beautiful. I just mean not having any other tabs open, full screen on the prospect, clean desk, no distractions, as much of your body visible as possible. Right? And both hands in view ideally, and with the ability to lean forward and backwards. And those would be like the only things that I say are actually required in order to actually see success with your environment on a sales call. Right. So if I were to take a sales call, I would lean back like this and allow the prospect to see both of my hands. Because what it does is, we'll actually go into the theory behind it, but in person is very different from Zoom. But if you've ever done any in-person sales, you'll notice it's a lot easier to build rapport, a lot easier to establish a connection because you can see that a person is human. So what we want to do on our Zoom calls is emulate as much of that environment as we actually have the ability to do. Right. So yeah, we might not be able to actually go there, but we can do our best to show that like, hey, I'm a person, I'm moving around. Because if you're just like a talking head and they can only see your neck up, it's very difficult to build emotion. Whereas if they can see you move forward, they can see you move backward, they can see you smile, they can see you use your hands when you speak, it gets closer and closer to being like an actual real human conversation. And in direct proportion to the closeness and how close we are to that is how much effectiveness we have when you're actually trying to sell people. Second thing, going to be the question into story. Right. So I mentioned up here the Suedo FBI interrogation. This is not necessarily a bad thing, right? The questions that you have to ask them, right? You have to qualify them. You have to make sure they're a good fit. You have to learn about their business so you're actually sure that you can actually provide them a service, but you don't want to do it in the way that you're currently doing it, right? If you're not naturally social, it's going to save your life because using this format, you can still build rapport without entirely throwing your sales script, right? So I'd say, hey, don't have it open, but if you can remember your questions, it's going to be perfect, right? And the only way we do it is by disguising the questions that we ask by sharing our own real stories and actual experiences. Right, so here's the equation. Right, you ask them a question, receive response, personal relation. Right, and I know I made fun of the hey, you're from this location, da da da. I think that's fine at the start of the sales call, just not the justification of frame. Let's dive into this. So let's say, oh, you're from X location. Well, like my Y person, my family's actually from there. Says Z about it. Is that true? Haha. Right, and just like that, you've skipped over the awkward transition, and it's something that everybody already does. Right, I'm sure you've already done this before. That's why I use this example. When someone says, oh, they're from this place you've already been to, you're going to share that experience with them. Yet you don't do it when they bring up a client relation, right? If they go, oh, I've been struggling with Facebook ads. You're just going to move on to the next question. Or, oh, I've been struggling with social media groups. You're just going to move on to the next question. When in reality, you should have went like, hey, well, I had this client, Greg, and he was like struggling with all that. And like, I guess the way he kind of got over it was doing Y strategy, right? So you do it with this location thing, but you don't do it ever after that, right? And if you can implement it after that, you will gain a lot more rapport without going into the interrogation, right? And then damaging mission. You guys have all heard this. It's the classic. Got the 8 Mile story. Eminem rap battling this guy. The whole crowd loves this guy. He's cooler. Eminem's the only white guy in the building. The whole crowd is mostly black. And Eminem is better than SalesView. Right? It's all odds stacked against me. One, brutal honesty is how. Right? He just shot himself. And in direct proportion to the amount of damage that he made to himself is how much trust he built. Right? Obama. So somewhere in his first term, and I'm Canadian, right? So this is my interpretation of the story. It might not be the full truth. But Obama, when his first term, it came out that he wasn't born in the US. Right? He was like born in Kenya or something. Right. And through that authenticity, he had this speech where he revealed the whole thing. And that brutal honesty led to him going to his second term and actually being reelected. Right. A lot of people, a controversy like that, something like that, would have completely destroyed them because they would have tried to cover it up. And if it got leaked and if it got all the stuff, it would have destroyed them. Right. But he decided, hey, let me go opposite of that, use damaging mission. I will talk about it. Right. And through doing that, it won enough people over for him to get reelected. So everybody's always putting the best foot forward. Right. That's the core premise of this. Right. They show their successes, their wins, how hard they work, and everybody's pitfalls. Right? I do, you do, like everybody sucks at something, everybody has sucked days, yet we only show the good parts, right? It's human nature. So that's why when we don't show, the bad things to somebody, they start to assume and use their imagination as to what those things are. That's why comments like he probably just did that for Instagram. I wonder what his personal life is like. All these, I guess, pessimistic and kind of like backhanded comments, all just because somebody didn't use the 8 Mile effect. When you see someone's life is perfect and they're hating on you, oh, like this one that I get. Right? People assume that I have no life or that I don't enjoy my life because I work on my business. It's like, oh, that's because I haven't told them. I haven't given them the damaging commission. I haven't done all these things. Right? So the opposite of trust. That's the opposite of trust when we do that. When we only show a prospect the wins, we only show a prospect the good case studies, we only show the prospect everything we've done well, they will start to assume the negative things. Oh, he's lying. Oh, he's not doing this. Oh, he's not doing that. Right? And that is the opposite of trust. And we know that the prospect trusted everything we say, they close 100% of the time. Right? So that is very bad and we want to avoid trying to be the perfect person. And perfect example of this is Peter Parker. When Peter Parker started as Spider-Man and he was this cool ass web slinging dude, people would probably say, oh, it's just a highly lucky and genetically gifted mutant. But that's why people don't relate to Superman. If Superman had his backstory where he maybe wasn't the most fortunate or he had bad family growing up, people would like him a lot more. But the guy just spawned at a G. Right? He came in from a meteor on Earth, had superpowers, laser eyes, infinite strength. And because of that, everybody's just like, oh, this guy's cool. Right? Whereas Peter Parker started, or Spider-Man started as Peter Parker, right? Nobody really cared. And he's loved by so many people now because he represents authenticity and trust, right? We see his pitfalls with pain and he goes through the perfect hero's arc, right? Nobody can resist it. And that is why we must leverage in our sales calls the whole story of like, hey, this is how I messed up. And then the hero's arc of fixing it and achieving something good. And the first deal I ever closed, this exactly happened, right? I had gone, I think, about 4 or 5 sales calls. And this is when I first started, like no case studies, nothing, of just being told straight up no. Right, the first prospect I even got on the call with laughed at me and left the call, and I don't have the recording anymore, unfortunately. But on the 6th call or 5th call, I'm not sure which one it was, I spoke with this guy who was going to soon be like my future client and mentor. And when I called him, it wasn't over Zoom or anything like that. When I just pitched him, he called me on Instagram voice chat. And I'm at the gym at the time this happened. So I run outside of the gym, like freaking out, and I sit on the gym steps. And I answer this call to this guy, and he is sitting there with his shirt off at some like public restaurant in Cali with a hat on and sunglasses. And he just absolutely schools me on life. Like I give him my whole pitch, I try my whole sales thing, like sweaty as shit from the gym, and he just sees through it all. Right. And after he kind of breaks it down for me, like, hey, that's not how it works, I'm not really interested, I pretty well broke emotionally. Right. I was like, hey, you're right. I don't really know what I'm doing. I don't have a team or anything. Like I promise I'll be the hardest working person on your team and I'll do it for free. Right. And I got told no so many times. I didn't do this on purpose. This was complete desperation. And yet he closed. Right. And that client single-handedly is the guy that got me to 15, 20, 25K a month. That one guy, right? Just using that one damage mission. Another example, Tony Lee, right? So Tony Lee was one of the first people I met when I originally joined RC. I remember he'd be on the calls, and it was when he was first like really scaling his detailing agency. And he shared his failures and everything within his doctrination sequence. And it was one of the best examples I've seen, or one of the first actually examples I've seen, like a super strong damaging emissions. I didn't find out that I used damaging emission until after I learned about it and learned what it was. So on this indoctrination sequence, I'm sure you guys have seen it, right? I think it's in the Notion, crowded everywhere. It essentially explains the story of how he failed when he first started. He had to put the client ads on his card. He failed, got dropped by clients, and then into cracking the code in the system, right? That's his hero's journey. That's his Peter Parker story, right? He's the Peter Parker of the auto detailing niche. And because of that, people trusted him and he scaled, right? And 17K a month, that is more than a Harvard graduate lawyer after 26 years of intense schooling, right? And I'm sure, I don't mean to hate on this guy, but he's playing the fucking money game wrong. So once you leverage these strategies, you don't rely on one thing, right? And that is reciprocity. So as humans, like, we naturally want to give
I have
back.
one thing to add on this too.
Okay, go ahead.
Back up to the Tony Lee section.
Tony.
So like Tony Lee's story, like we created something out of nothing for him, right? So, you know, some of you guys might be on this call thinking, well, I don't have a rags to riches story. I don't have like a, I don't like, I think the indoctrination sequence is in the Notion. That indoctrination sequence was exaggerated. I was the one who wrote the indoctrination sequence. So, you know, basically it's like, even if you have like, you know, you can, like just use this exact principle and, you know, don't be afraid to, you know, add some flair, add some storytelling ability to it. Because that's just one of the objections that I always hear. It's, oh, well, you know, I've lived in a middle class family, but I don't have any rags to riches stories. And I'm just wanted to let you guys know that his indoctrination sequence was pizzazzed a little bit to get, you know, achieve what he achieved.
Yeah,
and it's like the same example from when you did it, that story you made up on the free call.
Yeah, like well, yeah, that was complete BS, but that was just me like proving a point. But yeah,
I'll show you guys something. So frat kid crying and starving. This may sound fucked up. I'll be honest.
what are you?
Okay, emotion is relative.
Bro.
Listen, just
come on.
listen here for a second.
Bro, come on.
Emotion is relative, and I'm gonna go extreme here to prove my point.
Someone who is going to join RSC in a few months will look back at all the VSLs and they'll land on this one and they'll be like, what the actual fuck?
This is the thumbnail.
Exactly. So
Someone's
here's my
got it
point.
worse.
I'm gonna go extremely extreme here to prove my point. Right? So emotion is relative, right? The human brain is exactly the same. Right? If you ever watched Huberman, we know that we all technically have the same installments of the same brain. We got the same chemicals, same hormones. This guy, regardless of his physical environment and situation, has the exact same brain as this guy. Right? That means that emotion is relative. Right? So the chemicals and sadness, to the exact same extent that this guy feels sadness, so does this guy. Right? And it's the exact same physiologically in the brain. Right? That is just a complete truth here. Right? In the brain, it is the exact same thing. Right? So in the sense of like, hey, yes, this guy has had a lot worse of a life in the physical environment, and I pray for him, and I hope he has the best life, and I hope that he changes. Emotion is relative in the sense of the fact that this guy was probably about as sad and experienced as much sadness as this guy at some point in his life, just because the brain can only increase and produce so much emotion, so much sadness, so much happiness, so much anger, that really anybody can mold the story. Right? Because the motivations that maybe led to you starting your business, whether or not you've never even got hit in your life, right? Never scratched your body, never had one failure, you've probably still cried. Right? And the emotion at which you felt, because it's relative, is strong enough to convey a strong story. Right? So anybody can have a story. And I know that example is extreme, but hey, you have a story. So moving forward, reciprocity. Right? Like as humans, we like to think we really enjoy giving back to people. I don't think that is true in a lot of cases. I just believe that we don't like the feeling of being indebted to others, right? We don't like having us really owe somebody something. And pretty well every human is good to a certain extent, right? They have a moral compass of which they will feel bad if they take everybody from something or everything from somebody and give nothing back, right? And because of that, to the direct proportion of which we provide value, we will get it back from our prospect. So people aren't paying you. It's because in direct proportion to the amount of value that you provided them directly or indirectly, as I spoke about before, you're not getting it back, right? So we need to use reciprocity to make prospects tell their story, right? So damaging admissions, their why. And once we do that, sales becomes extremely simple, right? So if a gym owner wants to send his daughter to college, most people, I'll get you more leads. Master sales, I will send your daughter to college. But we have to use this association loop. Where is it? I don't know where I made it. Oh, I got it. It's small. So you have to use this association loop over here to actually find out what this bottom thing is. Like that is what sales is. You have to find this thing, right? And that is really what it's all about. And the only way to do that is through telling our own story, right? And I know Dylan talks about this doctor analogy where like you ask them what they want, you give it back to them. And imagine maybe a situation here, like you go to the doctor for your check-in, you got pain, you tell him that at the very start, but you don't tell him where or why or how long it's been happening for. And he closes his eyes and walks up to the prescription cover, closes his eyes like this, randomly selects a bottle, hands it to you. Would you trust that guy? would you take that medicine that you just randomly grabbed off the shelf? Right? And the answer is no. Whereas if this guy listened to you and based on your symptoms, he prescribed knowing the pain, right? And you'll wait till tell us their pain, like figuratively and metaphorically, right? Their pain point and their physical pain in this analogy. Then all we do is we position the medicine as the solution, right? So Facebook ads or, painkillers, whatever it might be. And it's the exact same. And that's how we leverage emotion, right? So in order to get our prospects, and I'll repeat the very key point here, in order to get our prospect story, in order to get their why, like, hey, I want to send your daughter to college, we have to actually tell like why we're here, right? So my equivalent to this would be vote. And like I think I've talked about this before, but I want to vote. I really want to vote. Like that is my deep reason for business. Call it shallow, call it superficial. I want to fucking vote, right? If I were to go on a sales call and I want to talk to a prospect, I would share this and I would share like damaging admission, the hero's arc story, in hopes that through doing that, in direct proportion to the amount of value I provide emotionally, they're going to tell me their deep reason at the bottom of their association. And that is what I'd want to go after. Because if you can do that, you get the emotion. Once you get the emotion, you satiate based on what your offer is. We'll use Julian's example because I think it's a pretty base offer of like 3K, 3 months. We satisfy the emotion, and now all we have to do is logic. So in this situation, we go check. Right? We got phase 1 down. Now what we need to do is the logic phase. So moving on, logic. Right? Compared to emotion, logically selling your service is extremely easy. Right? There's only 2 strategies we use to do this, and they're both contingent on one thing. And that first is the logically good idea to work with you. If it's not a logically good idea to work with you, none of these things will work. And if it isn't, I suggest that you hit some time, spend some time on the drawing board in order to actually understand that. First thing I'll say is, in strategy number 1 to do this is actually something called a domain question. So I was thinking of calling these trap questions, but that sounds like there's any malcontent behind it, like trying to trap them into someone trying to trap you into paying money. As I spoke about before, that is not what we want the calls to actually operate like. These are going to be questions that you to logically justify later on during the call. So to give you an example, one that I always use my appointment setting agency was like, hey, what is your closing percentage? Most people would go like, hey, I close 68.4% of my deals. No, you don't. Right? And that's because you haven't watched the full masterclass yet. Right? You haven't taken your notes. You haven't applied what I'm teaching you right now. So I know that a lot of times people would gas up their numbers, but I would use this and I'd use it later on in the process to actually leverage and sell them. Right? So I just ask them what their closing percentage is. They tell me it, then I move on with the conversation, just like that. Right? And then I would use the question story. I'd say like, oh, my closing percentage, I only take qualified calls, all this stuff, build rapport, build the emotion, but then move on. Right? So I ask the question, then I move on. And then later in the call, once I've satiated the emotion, and there's a reason why this in the order of 1, 2, because you do the emotion first and then the logic, right? Emotion is the basis of all decisions are made. And then logic is follow up to like really hammer it home, remove buyer remorse and all this stuff, right? So you emotionally sell them and then you logically justify why they pay you. And that is the process you want to follow. But in order to actually get the logic, I just use the calculator breakdown. So once they answer the domain question about their closing, let's say they close 64.8% of the deals. I say, no, you haven't watched the masterclass. I would carry on emotionally selling them, but then when it came time to logically sell them, I had done all the emotion stuff that I could. I would then just pull up my calculator and like instead of doing like case studies up in Wazoo, objection handling, all the stuff, I would just pull up my calculator and do everything ahead of time, right? And create no reason why they should not pay me. So here is what I would do with somebody, calculator. So I'll actually do it with somebody on this call. Does anybody want to get sold the way I sold people on appointment setting? I will logically justify with your agency, same way I did it with somebody else's to close an 8K PIF. Anybody?
You're gonna sell us?
Well, I'm going to show you the way I logically sold somebody.
I'll do it.
Do it.
Okay.
Do it to Canada.
What's your ticket price?
Minimum 1,500, but I pitched 2K.
Minimum 1,500. What's your close rate?
Around 15%. Actually,
Around 15%.
Yep.
And how many sales calls do you take in a month?
Let's see. Around 16.
Right. So 2.4x, let's say 1,500 minimum. So at the minimum, you're making 3,600 in ad revenue per month. Right. So given your close rate, let's say I installed a setter team for you. Right. Like the typical basis, I'm going to be super pessimistic here, but essentially per setter, what you get is like 15 appointments per setter. Right. And that's the minimum. Usually we aim for 30. And like for most of the guys, we get 30. But for this example, let's say each setter books 15 appointments. Right. And these calls would be like super qualified, super leads. So like it wouldn't be question of that. Maybe we book 30 in the month, but only 15 of them are qualified, ready to go leads. After you call them, they confirm they're going to show up to the call. Right. So if we were to have 2 setters plugged in, that would be 30 appointments. Right. And let's say we even go lower. Right. So let's say 10% your close rate is. Right. So then we go 10%.
One thing I just want to add here, because I used to do the exact same thing. is, especially if I've showed them case studies and whatnot, I'd be like, this is what we did for this person, this is what we did for this person. I'd be like, but let's say we suck. Let's say I suck and we only do half of this. And then I would use that number.
Yeah, right. Like that's the process that you go down after. So it's like, hey,
But
4.5 deals.
but let's say I suck was like a powerful line when doing this.
4.5 deals, right? And they go, okay, well, that's double what you're bringing in right now. Right. So if we were to do this on a full commission rate, like, how would this not be profitable for you? Right. If we were to only, get paid when we book you an appointment, how would this not be profitable for you? And I go down this logical reasoning. And what would happen a lot of the time is you were very honest about your numbers, right? Like on a sales call, I'll show you what happened the majority of the time, right? You're like, hey, 1,500 minimum package, Like when I was talking with some of these guys, they're like, oh, I close at 50%, I sell a 4K offer. And it's like, oh, okay, how many appointments? So like, let's say we got you 30 qualified appointments, right? So we go 30, right? And let's say you close at 50%. Let's say you absolutely suck at sales, right? So you're not going to close 15 of the deals. Let's say you close 5 of the deals. If you close 5 of the deals, if you're selling a $4,000 thing, it's 20K. 20K in added revenue in a month. That's if you do 2 times worse than you said you would at sales, right? Given this is a bigger ticket price. And you can just absolutely screw them in the sense of, screw them in the sense like they can't give you the objection of, hey, this doesn't logically make sense. As soon as you hit them with the domain question to actually lead them into like, hey, this is logically a good idea for you, right? And the amalgamation of all of that combined with just fulfilling these sliders, understanding that you start down here and it's just your job to fulfill and rise up, just fucking beasting sales, right? Like that's all the theory behind it. But essentially, just sit down, tell your story. Every time you ask them a question, you tell a story of your own, tell a personal relation. As soon as you build enough rapport with them, you then move into the phase of like, hey, here's logically why it's a good reason. And then after that, you show them the price, right? If they trust you and if you've given them a good reason and shown them the math, like, hey, 20,000 is pessimistic numbers of what we'd add in revenue. Like, hey, it's $5,000. Right. And as soon as you have case studies to back it up, people will go ahead and move forward.
Yeah. I have contractors tell me like 80%.
Yeah.
Like,
and like that is when
loves
these
their
questions
numbers
just
so much.
absolutely
That's bullshit.
Exactly. And that's perfect, right? Because then you can use more damaging admissions saying, let's say we suck. Let's say we do this. Let's say we do that. Right. It just makes it lower and lower and lower, but still good because they overshot and moonshot what their close rate is so much. Right. And that is like the sales process that I followed and that I guess if I've reviewed any of your calls that I followed in order to audit your sales call.